FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network, and it's time for another Triple Lutz Report. This is episode number 455. So the question is, are you tired of winning yet? I heard that Kim Jong-un told Trump, we'll always have Paris. Actually, I mean Singapore. Kind of like Casablanca, right? Just when you thought you couldn't take any more winning, history gets made. The U.S. and North Korea signed a major, if somewhat vague and not detailed, agreement to denuclearize. I was almost going to say nuclear. Do you know how to say nuclear? It's nuclear. Denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, and to head on to the goal of normalizing relations between the two countries. It's quite obvious to most observers, or at least it should be by now, that this deal was already cut well in advance of the actual meeting. That's the way countries do things. It should also be obvious, even to the most deranged of Trump haters, that this historic meeting and agreement could have never happened without the tireless effort of the president and his advisors, not to mention China's President Xi as well. Look, it's been, for over 60 years, we've been in a technical state of war with North Korea. Actually, it's closer to 65, if you can believe it. Every president since President Nixon has been at a loss for a cohesive plan to deal with the Hermit Kingdom. We saw the USS Pueblo seized, North Korean abductions of innocent citizens, regular artillery barrages across the DMZ, submarines invading the waters of South Korea, and many, many more provocative acts which tested American resolve and always found it wanting. We saw efforts by Clinton to bribe the North Koreans into submission, and not surprisingly, they wound up having the opposite effect. Why was this situation allowed to metastasize and fester and turn into the threat of nuclear war? Surely steps could have been taken to diffuse tensions much earlier. Is it possible that this situation fed into the deep state's ambitions, strategy, and goals? Was it their intention all along to drive the world into a nuclear conflagration? Who benefited from the status quo? Someone must have. We'll probably never know what their ultimate plan was for North Korea and the world, and perhaps that's for the better. What we do know now is that President Trump has achieved the near impossible. When I was watching the two leaders sit down and shoot the breeze, it reminded me of Nixon's trip to China, except that when Nixon went to Beijing, the stakes were never as high. We weren't on the brink of global nuclear war. Rather, it seemed like good policy to have relations with the world's most populous country that was, let's face it, a potential source of extremely cheap labor to feed the globalist ambitions. While momentous in its own right, Nixon's trip to China didn't appear as significant and world-changing as the Singapore summit. To understand what comes next, we must never forget that Trump is the ultimate showman. They're already working on the release of Acts 2, 3, and 4, etc. And they promise to be even more major and more significant than this week's face-to-face. And there are lessons in it for both friends and foes of the United States. That should be apparent. So sit back, relax, buckle your seatbelt, and enjoy the ride. There's a lot more to come. So I don't know if you watch Tucker Carlson or not. I generally watch no television news, but I find Tucker Carlson to be extremely entertaining and just a downright ballbuster to the left. Look, you can make the same arguments against the right when you've got knee-jerk people who don't ever critically analyze their beliefs and their positions. Then they're rightfully open to ridicule and getting ripped to shreds by an interviewer's reason. Doesn't matter what side they're on. If they don't think critically, then really there's nothing there to talk about. It's just gobbledygook. So Tucker Carlson is outraged because he just found out that the FAA is hiring affirmative action air traffic controllers. And, this isn't a new story. I heard about this years ago. Obama did this. For some reason, he thought that diversity in the air traffic control center in the towers was a more worthy goal than air traffic safety, which is a madness, total madness. Let me ask you a question. Would you rather go to an affirmative action dentist or a dentist that worked his butt off to get through dental school? How about an affirmative action heart surgeon? How about an affirmative action airline pilot? There are certain places, if there's any argument for affirmative action, there are certain places where it needs to never rear its ugly head. And certainly the air traffic control tower is one of them. They switched from this back in 2015. Jason L. Riley, who happens to be an African American and is not an affirmative action Wall Street Journal reporter for certain, he wrote that they got rid of the merit-based test, which is called ATSAT, Air Traffic Selection and Training, which measures cognitive skills. And instead, they went to this biographical questionnaire, and basically anybody could get in. Do you know that it costs more than $400,000 on average to train a competent air traffic controller? So he goes back and he talks about the Bakke case, the Ricci case, and it limits agencies' abilities, the Ricci case, to discard hiring criteria in order to increase minority representation. And it's especially when there is no strong evidence that the criteria are not job related. So, this is insane. The FAA changed its screening process in 2014. Thousands of applicants who were already in the pipeline, people who are well qualified, former air traffic controllers for the military, they were given the gate. And then all of these unqualified people, who knows if they went to college or not, were basically given a free pass to wreak havoc in the nation's airways. And he goes on to talk about the Bakke case. Now, remember, I'm always telling you how corrupt the legal profession is. Having been in it for 30 years myself, I've seen it firsthand. Corruption and incompetence rule the day. So there was a case in 1978, the Bakke case. Alan Bakke sued the state of California for giving preference to Patrick Chavez, who is one of 5 black students admitted to a medical school in California through an affirmative action program. And what Riley doesn't know, most people don't know, is that this was a contrived case. And a contrived case meaning what happens is the guy at Bakke sues the state of California, but he really wasn't an aggrieved party. I think he got into another medical school. So the case actually goes to court, goes through the appellate level, and finds its way on the Supreme Court. The same thing with Roe versus Wade. It was a contrived case, meaning it wasn't a real case in controversy. The whole thing in courts is you must have a case in controversy. You're not supposed to have the parties conspiring to get a favorable decision from the Court of Appeals or the U.S. Supreme Court. It's totally a violation of ethics, and it's bad policy because it enables you to custom tailor issues and questions for the court to decide to further your own political or whatever ambitions, your doctrinaire ambitions. So many of the cases that make it to the U.S. Supreme Court are contrived cases, and oftentimes the judges know it, and they still allow it to occur. A professor I had was instrumental in Roe v. Wade. His name was Cyril Means, professor of constitutional law at New York Law School, and he would tell us, he'd go through these cases and tell us they were contrived and that the parties conspired to bring the case to the Supreme Court to put it before the court. Whether any of the judges were in on it or not, I can't say. But this is the type of corruption that occurs. I'm digressing, but the point is, this guy Chavez, he gets in to medical school as an affirmative action doctor. And lo and behold, in 1978, the Supreme Court strikes down the program, strikes down affirmative action for graduate school. But Chavez, he went on to earn his medical degree, and he became a poster child for advocates of racial preferences. And then in 1995, he made the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and Senator Ted Kennedy called him the perfect example of how affirmative action worked. But then we fast forward to 1998, the California Medical Board revoked Chavez's medical license, noting his inability to perform some of the most basic duties required of a physician after several patients in his care died or were severely injured. So, look, if admitting poorly qualified students to medical school increases the number of incompetent doctors, then admitting poorly qualified students to air traffic control training is obviously going to make our skies much more dangerous. So, Tucker, welcome to the fight. It took you 3 years to figure this out, but your show only started, I guess, about 6 months ago. God only knows how many other professions are being contaminated and diminished by affirmative action. And that could be whether it's racial or for women or for anyone else who's not qualified. Hey, probably affirmative action lawyers, probably you wouldn't know the difference because most are not super competent. And the way our system works today, well, geez, I don't have to tell you about that. So along the line of education, or lack thereof, in New York City, the Department of Education principals have free rein to pass failing kids. And it's just amazing. It's an open secret, at least to the department, but not so much for the public. Former PS 123 head Tyra Williams passed a slew of flunking kids in 2013 and 14, and investigators were sent in by the DOE, and they determined that she had every right to do it. And the way it worked is the school's principal is permitted to change a student's grade, but must notify the teacher in writing of the grade change. And this is education. So yet another reason why the government should be kept out of something so important as educating your children. Well, there's lots and lots of craziness going on. I would hope that the Trump administration would end the FAA's affirmative action program. It's going on to this day, and probably these people wash out pretty quickly. I don't know that they just let them go, but another show on Tucker Carlson, guy is saying how the FAA turned its back on cheating by potential or wannabe air traffic controllers, and boom, the FAA just turns its back on it and they don't care. Hey, by the way, the Fed raised interest rates this year. What's going to happen? Is it going to have a major effect on the economy? I'm thinking not. A trend in motion stays in motion until it stops. And we have no indication of seeing this thing stop. You got to be very careful when you take selfies. Be careful that you retain situational awareness. That's the whole problem with smartphones. You see people walking down the street. You have no situational awareness because you're absorbed by that little bright screen that's doing stuff that's helping to release dopamine into your brain. And these two Australians, Michael Kearns and his British girlfriend, well, one Australian, Michael Kearns, 33, and his British girlfriend, Louise Benson, standing on a wall overlooking the picturesque Praia dos Pescadores beach early Tuesday when their phone slipped. And the pair reached out to grab the cell phone, lost their balance, and they both fell 98 feet to the rocky beach below. I mean, come on, let the cell phone go. This is a thing in Florida, really upsets me as well. Look, I'm all for turtles. I'm all for preserving wildlife. I love wildlife. You know that. But we have these turtles here in Florida, and they like to cross the road. And the problem is, when they cross the road, you know what happens? People will slam on their brakes and risk death to avoid hitting them. And they'll even get out of their cars in the middle of traffic and attempt to save these turtles. Now, look, I love turtles. I think they're wonderful. Turtles are great. But I'm not willing to risk my life for a turtle. This is the most stupid thing I have ever seen. And yet, happens like here, you can't believe it. So time to really worry about human life. If you can do something nice for animals, I'm all in favor of that. You know that. But you can't just be risking your life and the safety of everyone else to do stupid things, which seemingly there's no shortage of people willing to do it. Hey, remember a week ago, I was talking with John about the fact that a Nevada brothel owner named Dennis Hoff was in the Nevada primary for state assembly. He won, and I don't know. I heard that, and I don't know if it's true, that Stormy Daniels was his campaign manager. If anyone knows whether that's true or not, just write me. Hey, I forgot to say, as always, send us emails. Love to get your emails, kl@kerrylutz.com. And while we're at it, just the craziest things happen in life. There's no shortage to what types of things you wind up getting involved in. I don't know if you caught this, but Robert De Niro, goes in this profanity-laced tirade against President Trump at the Emmys. I stopped watching rewards programs years and years ago. They're boring. They're self-congratulatory. They're, the height of narcissism. And yeah, I do kind of like to check out what the female stars are wearing. But, really, is there any purpose for them? Any purpose whatsoever? And I'm not sure, but if you can figure out a purpose for them, please write us. Anyway, that's it for now. Been another Triple Lutz Report. Kerry Lutz signing off.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.